May I quickly invite on stage the esteemed chair and moderator for this session, Lieutenant General Ajay K. Chandele, PVSM, AVSM, retired, Chairman, Geospatial World Chamber of Commerce. I request you all to please kindly remain seated. We are quickly moving on to our next panel discussion. May I take the opportunity of inviting on stage Dr. Ranjana Kaul, Partner, Dua Associates and Space Law Expert, our esteemed panelist. Please join me in welcoming Commodore J.S. Shergill, NM, retired, former Executive Director, NMF. Captain K.K. Agnihotri, retired N, Senior Fellow, National Maritime Foundation. We warmly welcome Air Vice Marshal D.B. Khot, former DSA and Fellow CAPS. And also joining us for this session, Mr. Damodaran Raman, Director, Deloitte Consulting.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. This is the final day of a 3-day test match. And in my younger cricketing days, being a bowler, I was always the last man in. And if number 10 had to come into bat, then the team was in trouble. And most of the spectators had left the stadium. For that, read auditorium.
There are some more lines, sir.
Okay, good. So, the last 3 days we've been discussing the complete space ecosystem. And the most important part of it is the formulation of space policy, doctrines, and strategies. These terms are sometimes used with overlapping meaning, but a policy would give the broad guidelines and principles. The doctrine would give more detailed guidance as to the operational tasks, and the strategy would have a high-level planning for long-term objectives. Now, you're aware that last year the government released the India space policy, which was actually, as per the preamble, providing a regulatory certainty to the reforms that the government had unleashed about 3 years ago in 2020, when it sort of opened up the space domain to the private sector participation as well. Now we are short of time, a deficit of 50% of our total time, and I will avoid all the frills and straight over, hand you over to our expert, Dr. Ranjana Kaul, who will give us a broad overview of this complete policy, doctrine, and strategy framework.
Good afternoon, and thank you for actually being here at this time. It's exhausting to hear people talking endlessly, I know, but anyway, bear us out. So firstly, I will leave this business of strategy and doctrine and all such things to my esteemed colleagues who are the experts here, and they have worked hands-on, so let me not dwell there. I will also not say anything about the policy. I have written an article which is on the website of the SIA, but short point here is that in my view, each of the users must have his own strategy. And then here I'm talking of strategy in terms of building a policy. So defense space strategy, a civil space strategy, a commercial space strategy, a security space strategy, and also a cyberspace strategy for space. But what I'm going to talk to you really about today is to dispel this general assumption in our country, right all the way top, down and vertical, that peaceful use of outer space means civil space activities. So that falls somewhat foul, if you like, with our defense space users, with military space users, and they can't make sense of how in God's name they are going to undertake military activities when in fact peaceful activities, that is civil, is what is expected. So here's what I'm going to tell you, and as I was talking to AVM Khot the other day, that and to you, that I'm going to tell you something that I have never spoken of before. And that is this. We all know about Sputnik, 1957, 4th of October. You will have read that it caused a revolution in military affairs. Well, that's half the story. Sputnik was launched on an R-7 rocket. It was an intercontinental ballistic missile. What it indicated was that Soviet Union had advanced space capability. It was already a nuclear capable state. So was the United States, because that is exactly what they were doing from 1945 to 57. Just that it was the Soviets that rocked the boat first. Straight away to the United Nations, to the UN First Committee. The First Committee deals with international security and disarmament. International security and disarmament. The whole point of the matter is both the superpowers, they're existential threats to each other, but they want stability, peace, uncontested space, with the ability to freely use, unrestricted use of space to continue space activities and development. So what is it that they do first of all? So I'm going to tell you something, try and figure out what I'm saying. The states to consider an inspection mechanism that a space object through outer space, will be exclusively for peaceful purpose. Now, what do you think that meant? Exclusively for peaceful purpose is a euphemism to say that any space object traveling through the trajectory of outer space cannot be a nuclear space object, space weapon. It is a prohibition on the use of outer space for transporting nuclear weapons. That is what exclusively for peaceful purpose means. It also says to consider an inspection mechanism to ensure that a space object for scientific purpose is exclusively for peaceful purpose. So what does that tell you? I've already given you a clue. It means no further nuclear tests in outer space. You would know that both the states had conducted zillions and millions, I mean, I'm only using loose language, nuclear, thermonuclear, every which way. And now they had the capability, so they were prepared to put a halt on it. That's the first part. Now, what about my space activities which do not have any nuclear component? What about that? So, a new terminology, peaceful use of outer space. Military use of outer space. Military activities in outer space is coterminous with peaceful use of outer space. That is what peaceful use means. So you're absolutely on track. It has absolutely nothing to do with civil space activities. It is uniquely applicable only to military space activities. Last of all, inspection system. Now what is this inspection system? Surveillance satellites. So there was some debate on the subject between the two superpowers. And they figured that instead of trying to send their army men disguised as either a Russian or an American and they get caught, or sending an Air Force pilot into sovereign airspace getting shot, maybe surveillance satellites was a good thing. And everything from the launch sites to the launch to signals to you name it and you know it all, I don't need to tell you. Therefore, surveillance satellites was determined to be consistent with the peaceful use of outer space. When you look at these treaties between Soviet Union and the United States, SALT I, SALT II, START and all, they use the term technical, national technical means of verification, that is surveillance satellites. That is what the whole thing means. So military use of outer space, or the use of outer space for military activities for peaceful purpose to the extent prohibited under international law. Now what does that mean? It means the United Nations Charter. And you're well aware that Article 51 provides the state inherent right of self-defense. That is why we call it non-aggressive. So this was the basic structure that was established within 5 weeks of Sputnik in the UNFC. Then, of course, there were other aspects they required which were independent of disarmament. Space has nothing to do with disarmament and all that. So they established the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space to determine these other aspects that they require. In 1958, and in 1959 established a secretariat for the QPUs, which we know as USA. The whole mechanism that is drafted, interconnected, intermeshed, you cannot, remove one from the other, they're interlinked. It's all to do with the military use of outer space. But that does not mean that non-military activities were prohibited. We happen to choose non-military activities, which you call civil space activities. And from 1972 to this date, we are convinced that peaceful use means civil use. It does not. So you're perfectly, free under the Outer Space Treaty, accepting that it is for you, the military users, to understand all the nuances and all the aspects that actually provide you operational guidance in the Outer Space Treaty and the accompanying treaty. There are several other international instruments that are required for you to study. Without that foundation and that domain knowledge, I am not very certain, but you can verify that, whether you are going to be able to stand on firm feet and do this. There is another reason why you need to have domain knowledge, and that is commercial space. Now, commercial space is required to be authorized by the state. That authorization is done through National Space Activities Law. Now, if a civil space user is going to write that draft space activities bill and send it to you, the military user, will your eyes understand what to look for? Will you be able to immediately ascertain that, no, this cannot be worded in so because I'm going to be adversely affected? No, you don't know how to look at it. It cannot be that you have your commercial space which wants to do activities which needs a law at the cost of military space. So you need domain knowledge for that. And I'm telling you this for the reason that in 2017, because a question was raised in Parliament, when is India going to have a space activities bill? So straight away a space activities bill was drafted and circulated for comments. And of course, while civil space, not civil space, but the commercial spaces were absolutely arm in arms because there were certain things that was completely not acceptable to them. So was it the industry, because they're wondering whether they would now be required to be governed by that. But I was looking at it from military angle also and discovered that अगर वो कानून में तब्दील अगर हो जाता 2017 में, आपको बड़े मुश्किल में डालता 2 साल आगे चलते हुए. So I wondered what it was, and I realized that of course ISRO is a civil space, non-military. Of course it looks from that perspective. It knows everything it needs to know. It's running a great show. But does it know how to look from military perspective? No. It also knows this. Therefore, it seeks the guidance of professors of law. I know those professors. They're very well established, very well regarded. But do they know the Outer Space Treaty? India's universities do not have a course like this. I did my LLB in India. Jurisprudence, public international law, this United Nations, so forth, and private international law, LLB, you get into practice If you really want to specialize, well, so be it. Now there is a possibility of an LLM in international law. In India, as you know, an MA or LLM is a 2-year degree course, semester. So one semester they teach you UNCLOS, laws of the seas, Chicago Convention, that is civil aviation, Outer Space Treaty, and you read the Moon Agreement. Done. So for sure, you can find professors who will read the same thing that you will read and say, look, Article 4 has this, and you cannot put nuclear weapons anywhere in space, all that kind of thing. You can also read it. Who is going to help you with understanding the domain with your eyes? You need to have in-house capacity built. It is not only for the users. I think the Ministry of Defense, there needs to be a change over here. You need to reform those. You need in-house capacity. It takes a long time to build. There are challenges in finding resource people, but that has to happen. Second of all, if you're military users, it is automatically connected to international security. That takes you straight away to 2 places. One is the Ministry of External Affairs, and the other is NSA and NSAB. They need to be sensitized because they also think that peaceful use is civil use. You are the ones who I see as first generations. As AVM Khot was said, no, I'm a veteran. I said, that's precisely why you're the first generation. You've been there at the inflection point when you were in service, and now you have to find a way. Our institutional setup is set up for 1972, ISRO civil space activities. How we are operating at the COPIUS, the legal subcommittee, I do not know. We are very robust in the scientific and technical subcommittee. We are really very good. We are chairing a working group just now. But in the legal subcommittee, every single word and phrase is a loaded phrase when countries are submitting. They're looking at it from military angle and, sort of working it all out in the way that, legalese of diplomatic language, etc. And they place that position into. You have to do this for yourselves and all of us also. You have to do it for us. You've been doing it for us all this time and now also for space. So please, this is my suggestion for you. I'll rest my case.
Thank you, ma'am, for this overview on the outer space law and what the defense needs to do. And we'll come back to this, that how do we ensure safeguarding our national security with the space domain. And for that, you are all aware that the Defense Space Agency was set up very recently, about 2 or 3 years ago. And we have with us the second Director General of the DSA, AVM Khot, with us. And he was responsible for, consolidating the work which the DSO had started with. He built institutional expertise, initiated a number of projects, and this was a period of consolidation with great churning in the space domain. And he had the ringside seat of the events and the discussions that took place. I'll request you, AVM Khot, to please share your views.
Thank you, sir. And thanks to the die-hard audience still here at the graveyard shift. Actually, the recording of this session should be called Die Hard 5, the graveyard shift. Thank you so very much for being here. The topic being one about policy and doctrines and strategy. We actually lift ourselves out of the brass tacks, the technologies involved, and address the abstract essence so that we can make sense of that and shape it into actions and into strategies. So I'm going to touch upon a few things. The content for this kind of a thing is huge. I will confine myself, with paucity of time, to the few things that I believe are absolutely salient for all of us to. A few observations on the environment under which we are supposed to operate as defense space practitioners. Number one, space is intrinsically global. You carry your airspace with you when you spin. You do not carry space with you. So in 24 hours, every point on Earth faces 360 degrees. It turns and observes 360 degrees of space above you. So anything that happens in space impacts everybody. A nuclear explosion in our neighborhood, the fallout and the area of impact will be confined largely to a local zone and will spill over a little bit with fallout, not in space. It instantly affects everybody else. So some things in space are super strategic. It goes beyond even the implications of nuclear weapons. And there are implications of that on the doctrinal and the strategic front. Space is a uniquely hostile environment. It's not inviting to humans. That's why there are so few humans in space. Objects, yes, we've launched them there. Humans, how many? So not like land, not like sea, not even like air. And so everything we do in space and space exploration is a child of technology. Cyber and space together make an extremely powerful combination that has led to the democratization of space. Everything that is possible from space rides on cyber in ones and zeros. And with that, the power of space has flown into the palms of our hands when we hold that mobile phone. And what that has done is it has actually infused itself in every element of our national and personal lives, which means that the frontier of the safe space plus cyber combination has shifted to the backyard. The battlefront has shifted to the backyard. It's home. And who's the target? Anybody who uses data is a target. You and I are targets. Our families are targets. Our national institutions are targets automatically. And that has huge strategic implications, well beyond the kinetic form of warfare. Militarily speaking, space has converted the military domain into a transparent one. You have to learn how to fight naked. And everything that we do in space is dual use. So what works for the military, with adaptations, works for the civil side and vice versa. So these are some of the characteristics that I feel are very important for us to understand and have doctrinal implications. Few things quickly I'm going to hit upon when it comes to doctrinal implications of all of this. Number one, if it is all dual use and everybody is affected in the same way, then integration and cohesion internally is required when we shape our internal space control mechanisms within the country. Institutions, it has to run across the institutions that we build. It has to run across the policies that we build, because it's a sequence of policies that actually leads to the final outcomes. And they have to be coherent and they have to be able to talk to each other. Human resource, integration again. Apex level organizations and leadership, which is going to align everything towards a common cause. Otherwise, we have a talent for facing in 10 different directions. International collaborations have to happen. You cannot go space alone. And even your adversaries and even your enemies, and you have to talk to each other every day for space traffic management and other things. Ecosystem development, it was spoken about in the earlier session also, and some very hard-hitting and absolutely precise comments there from Mr. Khot, Mr. Ray here. Three things about ecosystem development. One, resource optimization using the extant resource, and we are flush with internal resources. It's just that we haven't mobilized them. We haven't put them together in a matrix. We have an enormous amount of resource going wastefully away in this country. Manpower, laboratories, scientific training, all of it is here. We have not learned how to put it all together in a combination that works. Resource generation, where it does not exist right now. And finally, capacity building, which is different from capability building. And it's only capacities that is going to launch you into an area where you endure. Otherwise, it's flash in the pan. When it comes to the military space organizations, we need to reshape and reorient. It requires deep tech knowledge. And that requires deep expertise. And that requires stability and continuity of tenure. Currently, our policies and the way we do our HR is not amenable to that. And we need to be very agile and retraining. Let me come to some strategy-related aspects now. Some principles, strategic autonomy should never be lost. And I think The foreign minister has made this point brilliantly over the last couple of years. 2, strategic ambiguity needs to be adopted. I cringe when I hear of defense satellites. What, we want to label them and point them out as targets, the first ones to hit? Why should anybody know what I'm putting on any satellite of mine? When you hear of Yaogan and Shijian and all of that, are we sure we know what payloads are on that and who they're working for? So how does he use strategic ambiguity so well, and why are we so fixated with calling something a defense satellite and feel very good about it? We need to grow up. Strategic alliances and collaborations. They have to be how we do business, because space is global. And this is 2. 1, global, like at the UN, like at the bodies. 2, with partners, with common interests, because there is strength in numbers. Ecosystem elements. Big elements, academia, so the starting point. R&D. And R&D straddles both academia and industry. So industry, the manufacturing part. The user and his ability to engage with everything else. And all of this is underpinned and underwritten by your capital, which means your funding capital, which means your human capital, which means your cognitive capital, your policies and the regulatory frameworks that you frame. That is the ecosystem that I'm talking about. The first thing we need to do is to reduce the number of institutions handling space. Once again, we have a talent to create a new organization every time we hit upon an idea. They're already there. We need to reach out to them. We need to clarify the mandates. We need to remove the overlaps, remove the duplication, so that each one is working as a part of a whole rather than coming into a friction and confrontation situation. Academia. We need to catalog what we have. And in my brief 2 years as DG DSA, I discovered there was a wealth of information, experts within the country, laboratories doing fabulous work. We didn't know that they exist. We still don't know that they exist. We need to catalog them. We need to build them into a matrix, a database, and then link them, experts to experts, experts to startups and MSMEs, experts to government. Experts have to help formulate policy. And that's the government part I'll touch upon. Industrial part. Okay. Another thing on academia. Like we talk about corporate social responsibility, I think we need to have academia social responsibility. They have to mandatorily incubate and nurture the startups. If there is one thing that's happening today that is revolutionary, it is the revolution at the grassroots industry level. We cannot let them die. Not a single startup with any kind of a viable idea should die. And that's got to be teamwork. Academia, industry, government, everybody. Again, when it comes to industry, corporate social responsibility, I would say there is also a corporate scientific responsibility. And absolutely wonderful to hear both Tata and L&T talk about, them incubating and having R&D facilities and so on and so forth. Again, nurturing the end, the last mile there in the startups. Users, we need to connect and communicate a hell of a lot more. Industry is clueless, and that's partly our fault. We need to get there. DIO, IDEX, all of these things we need to support. Policy. Now, this is the government area. Number 1, we need simplification. Number 2, we need stability in policy that was touched upon. We need to support the infrastructure part. Infrastructure, again, was touched upon by Mr. Ray in great detail there. We need to fund. And right now is what I call the value of death. In the next 5 years, the government has to support and fund. Industry is going to be able to do it only partly. We simply have to step up the game here and bridge this period with funds from the government. And I think it's already there. I find this awareness already there. It's showing in the budget. One of the things I feel very strongly about is one of the difficulties we face in the government sector is the auditors and the financial advisors and what we need to answer to them. I think they need to be made stakeholders and accountable for the progress we make. They have to be accountable for progress made or progress not made. Largely, and the last point on the government part of it is we need a data management policy, because data will flow in, it will come in huge quantities. The number of consumers out there are huge, and the consumers, the retail consumers, are going to commercialize and start this whole cycle. The commercial sector wins if there is a retail consumer and there is scale, which means the end user applications need to proliferate. And then the data can be monetized with larger and larger numbers. 1.4 billion sitting in this country itself, and plus there's more in the globe. On the military side, quickly, military strategy, 4 steps. 3, if you bring it down to that. 1 is deterrence. How do we build deterrence? Like we did Mission Shakti. You have a capability, build it. To demonstrate it, it has to be visible to be a deterrent. It can't be secret to be a deterrent. And then leave it hanging there. 2, be resilient, which means we need to build in survivability from a first attack. We need to have that graceful degradation path that Admiral Chauhan spoke about so brilliantly yesterday. We need to be able to restore what is lost, replace some of it perhaps, to be able to augment in a surge fashion with help from the industry and with other friends. We need to have numbers and reserves. Numbers have their own quality. And lastly, this is about resilience I was talking about, and lastly, to be able to retaliate. These are the pillars and the cornerstones of a military strategy. There's more, sir.
Thank
but
you. Yeah, we'll come back to you. So, Captain.
I am grateful to the SIA and particularly to Mr. Anil Prakash for giving me the opportunity and giving NMF the opportunity to present its views on the maritime security issues and how space plays an important role in this. Now coming straight to the point, there are strategies for addressing maritime security challenges, and they revolve around 5 paradigms, main paradigms, basic. Obviously it is accepting threats, then avoiding threats, reducing threats, monitoring threats, and controlling threats. Now, while acceptance of threats or risks in maritime warfare is axiomatic, I mean, if it is coming your way, you got to accept it. Then you can't shy away from it. And that's the second point. Its avoidance is rarely feasible. So, pragmatism would call for an effort to reduce risks through comprehensive monitoring, basically getting prepared, and credible control mechanisms. Now, adding and monitoring these threats in the maritime domain is obviously through the maritime domain awareness that you talked about. So, while there are so many sources and means to do so, the maritime domain awareness picture that can be built, the space-based surveillance technologies for generating MDA is the most relevant means that we are talking about as far as this conference is concerned. Now, the Indian Navy's Maritime Doctrine of 2009 and has flagged the importance of the role of space-based systems as critical enablers for effective command and control as well as the maritime domain awareness. Now, be that as it may, it came out in 2009, and I really identify with the points made by Dr. Ranjana Kaul, saying that the user has to first understand the domain before making policies, doctrines, and strategies to fulfill such policies and doctrines. Notwithstanding, this document came out in 2009, and I am sure if I do not understand the domain today, obviously 2009 the document came out without understanding the complete nuances of the domain. But notwithstanding, what it says is that this doctrine mainly talks about the command and control and the MDA, of course, how it has to be, space has to be leveraged for its optimum and effective utilization. Another document came out, Indian Navy Space Vision of 2014. It covered a period till 2027. It further elaborates upon the Indian Navy's doctrinal concepts. By providing coherent guidelines to acquire space-based capabilities for the Navy, it also addresses the Navy's futuristic space-based communication, ELINT, PNT, AIS also, remote sensing as well as surveillance requirements. It identifies the needed space applications and security services, catering to contingencies of war and peace, and defines critical enabling capabilities required up till 2027 and beyond. Now, the Indian Maritime Security Strategy of 2015, maybe had we heard Dr. Ranjana Kaul 2009 and 2015, our document would have been much, much better. Notwithstanding, it further lays down the strategies to fulfill the provisions of Indian maritime doctrine and flags those areas where the space-based systems are of utmost relevance. Now, there are various strategies. There is a strategy for conflict, strategy for coastal and offshore security, and strategy for maritime force and capability development.
All linked to space, no?
No, there are 8 strategies. These 3 find these space where the space-based systems can be leveraged for best maritime security. Now, while these strategies for conflict and coastal and offshore security flag the role of space-based systems for MDA, net-centric operations, surveillance, AIS, and position reporting of ships as well as aircraft, the strategy for maritime force and capability development seeks the participation of private sector towards indigenization of defense industry and R&D, particularly towards enhancing the space-based surveillance systems and the other systems I talked about. So case in point is like the AIS system. We have resource at a series of satellites, but mind you, they are not only for Navy applications or something. They are not dedicated for military or maritime issues. They have also got other, I would say, civilian applications. So Navy is only sharing it. But here in one academic, I would say, institution, Hyderabad-based, I think PES University, has come up with a technology demonstration satellite called Sindhu Netra, which has got a AIS payload. Surprisingly, I would identify with AVM Khot's point, very little is known about the satellite per se in the domain, in the open domain. So having little bit of information, finding out from Bhopal or wherever other places, and I will stick to the open source only. It has AIS payloads, and it can cover areas from maybe the Gulf of Aden side where the area is becoming pretty hot, maybe up to the South China Sea. The potential is quite large, and idea has been brought up by the university and has been implemented by ISRO's hand-holding, and it is there in space since 2021. It's still at a demonstration stage. There are many more such AI satellites required. I will tell you the I say force multiplier effect of that. I'm not saying that, but systems like that. We have the Indian Ocean, we have the IFC IOR, Information Fusion Center for the Indian Ocean region, not very far from here in Gurgaon. And last 1 month we have been seeing Indian Navy commandos rescued 2 ships from various pirates. So many things happened. How did the ships reach there in a very, very, I would say, coordinated time frame? Of course, the ships have to be there, yes, in the vicinity somewhere. But the AIS signals from space-based as well as terrestrial as well as by international collaborative means were all the time available to the IFC IOR. And the moment the ship went dark for whatever reason, either pirates captured it or ship didn't want to locate, give its position anymore, the thing was switched off or whatever the thing. Immediately the IFC IOR raised an alert, and the whole ecosystem, surveillance ecosystem, including the just imported UAVs from US, as well as our P8Is, as well as our ships, and every whole ecosystem went and actually helped in a quick reaction and quick rescue of these things. So I'm just giving one example of how things happened. So I think I will stop for the time being here, and then maybe be open to questions later.
Right. Mr. Damodaran, would you like to give your comments, please? Yeah.
Good afternoon, all. So happy to be on the dais second time, and with the distinguished panels. I'm from ex-ISRO and then consultant. Sitting on this topic, I'm really thinking that what should I will talk about. But only thing it stuck to my mind is basically India's security interest. That's the point which I could talk about, right? See, in my point of view, surely I will take only a few minutes because I know that it's between your departure and we are where we are here. One is the indigenization, right? Basically, when we talk about, purely talk about the national security, today, if we take about the satellites, I think that the open source data says it's around 55% of components are imported, right? And we know the COVID time, what happened to the semiconductors, which has cost so much into the automobile industry and then whatnot. And it's a high time for India, since we want to become, third biggest, economy, and we want to become the superpower, and we have all the potential, and each and every one should think about the indigenization. When I joined ISRO, a 22 years old person, always I see that something which is coming from outside, then if there is an issue, then I cannot sleep, because that may be my problem. I could do at least 2 or 3 indigenization within that critical elements, which I proudly can talk about. So I request all of you to think on this direction, because that's the need of the hour. Any geopolitical tension which comes in, and if any one country which is supplying a minute of any element of a chip can disrupt the everything, right? So that's the need of the hour, my point of view. Second thing, we also talk about space policy, which they have created. The next one is then FDI. See, the FDI is very nice to talk about. I think that's going to come in soon. But my personal view, I think it has to be ring-fenced very, very carefully, because unless otherwise, when we talk about the national security perspective, the boundary should be well defined in the interest of our security, because otherwise somebody will invest and then all our things will go out. The third one, quickly, the policy is evolving. I think we know that ISRO has released this policy. I think it's an evolving process. I think we as a Deloitte, we closely work on these things with the InSpace and ISRO, and pretty much somebody is talking about the funding for the startups. I think it's too early to talk about. I think there are a lot of things in place, even in the states and the center, which we are working very closely with the government. And the final point which I would like to make is the knowledge transfer, right? When we talk about the knowledge transfer from the ISRO, right? SSLV is being transferred to this. It's all good about that. But we need to make the liability, right? The knowledge transfer of such a critical ones which is getting into the wrong hands, right? And as rightly said, that it's a dual purpose. And constructive should not become the destructive within. So these are all the few pointers, which most of the things on the strategies I think experts have done. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Damodaran. Commodore Shergill, you are the last speaker of this 3-day conference, and you have the opportunity to give the doctrinal takeaways from this complete seminar, and you like to stand and do it.
Yes, sir.
But don't take too much time. Huh?
No.
Okay.
It will be very crisp. Thank you, sir. I am Commodore Shergill. I am unemployed and I am not even an advisor. Ranjana mentioned that she was speaking to me. I don't know whether she was speaking to me or bullshitting me. About a couple of months back, I was playing golf, and in rang the phone with General Pannu on the other side. He said, Shergill, I want to include you in this seminar. Having served under him very closely and having great respect for him, I had no choice but to say yes, but it came with a price. Everything in life comes at a price. After that, I have observed whenever I hit a golf ball, it is headed towards space. And my 4-ball, they have warned me that again, if it happens continuously, we will kick you out from our 4-ball. The 3-day seminar has provided us with some doctrinal tenets for the military space doctrine. I will now give my perspective. Once any policy is promulgated by higher authorities, doctrines are prepared. They are basically concepts which underpin the development of a strategy which ensues thereafter. Towards this, our thought process and concepts should be as clear as a crystal, lest ensuing strategies fall flatly on their face. Doctrines never direct as to what is a solution to a particular problem. Learn this by heart, especially the academia and industry, if not the armed forces personnel. That is the task of a strategy. Policies, doctrines and strategies are interrelated, of course, but they are not interchangeable. Learn this also by heart before you have dinner tonight. The thought-provoking seminar brought out the use of space for security as well as security of space, importance of industry, military industry, R&D, academia convergence for not only whole of nation approach, but should also include friendly foreign countries as well. Space laws, requirement of skilled manpower, etc., etc. Sometimes the term space situational awareness was used, and at times space domain awareness was used during the seminar by the speakers. Are they the same or are they different? Food for thought. The doctrine has to expound on the same. We possibly cannot play with words, after all, which all of us tend to do many a time unknowingly. There is an urgent need for enacting a long outstanding domestic space act so that it can be factored in the doctrine. Our military vision, aim, interests, objectives will also merit inclusion. I am happy to note that we are looking into inner space also. This space holds the key, as very rightly brought out in the proceedings. HAPs are a cost-effective option for use in this space at the moment as a bridging concept. I observed many terms like space control, space denial, space supremacy, space domination, C5, IST, AR2, smart power, VLEO, dark zone, zoning, etc., etc. were used rather loosely and therefore need to be defined very, very clearly. Otherwise, they are of no use whatsoever and can be misleading. For that matter, everyone said peaceful use. Ranjana also expounded on the same. What is the meaning of peaceful use? Americans say it is ensured by aggressiveness. The Russians say it has non-military connotations. We have to define it as we perceive it, as to what it is. The doctrine should then be put in the open domain and the knowledge shared with the policymakers, industry, academia, intellectuals, international community, uniformed fraternity, lawyers, and last but not the least, the taxpayer who wants bang for the buck at the end of the day. I was rather disappointed to hear that some terms like inner space, Cameron line, etc., etc. are not legally accepted, but then that is correct. We, however, cannot keep looking over our shoulders all the time. It is now up to us to legalize them by including them in our doctrine and change the rules of the game thereafter. Maybe we can look into separate doctrine for inner space, another food for thought. There is indeed a need to promulgate a national space, military space doctrine at the earliest by following an all-inclusive and integrated approach. How I wish that some policymakers from the government of India were also in attendance towards this end. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the aims of any doctrine is to signal our intent to the world in general and adversaries in particular that India of today has arrived. I understand InSpace has not yet promulgated security guidelines tasked by the Government of India in the National Space Policy of 2023. They need to issue the same as soon as possible. This will assist in buttressing military space doctrine. I thought one rep from InSpace was supposed to be on the panel, but I don't think he's there in this hall.
Yeah, he was aware you were going to ask this question, so he didn't come.
Okay, thank you. Due to paucity of time, I could not touch upon some other aspects which merit inclusion in the doctrine. Dr. Subba Rao rightly highlighted the aspect of sluggishness in our approach. The only way we can surmount over that is by ensuring the government reps and reps of all stakeholders go into a huddle in a government guest house or maybe a fortnight and work 24/7 and come out with a doctrine and a broad strategy. It is not that difficult, let me tell you, after all. The talent is there and we just have to tap them by getting them under one roof by sense of ownership. Otherwise, third deficit would have come and gone without a military doctrine and strategy in place. And young people, academia sitting behind, think bold. Yesterday during the war game, the chips were down. We were fighting against our backs to the wall. Nobody said use counter space weapons. Physical, kinetic, non-physical. There was no need of any discussion. Think bold. Then only you will be there. Thank you so much. And thank you, SIA, for attending me. And thank you, General Pannu, for inviting me in this panel. Jai Hind.
And on a lighter note, Shergill, you can feed some AI into your ball so that it doesn't go into space next time. Right. Anybody from the panel who has missed out something and would like to add quickly? Okay. Then to the audience, what would you expect from the government in the form of a policy or a doctrine or a strategy? Somebody had said that 20 years strategy. So are we anywhere in that? Yes, Amandeep.
I don't have a query, sir. I have a problem, which I believe DEFSAT 2024, in his report, will definitely resolve it. DEFSAT 2024 is a 3-day event, but we are carrying the legacy of previous 9 days of India Space Congress 22, 23, DEFSAT 2023, and now 2024. So this 12-day of brainstorming has now brought us more clear picture. I would like to take AVM Khot's point of academia social responsibility. Over here, as a military in service, in uniform, end user, I am not equipped with any kind of formal training on the space issues. It is functional issues, whether it is a software made by Adren, whether it is a payload planning training at ISTRAC, or any other image interpretation subject. However, as a defense end user, the academia, for that knowledge, either for legal knowledge, I have to go to universities. For space law knowledge, that is limited with 2 universities. Any other doctorate, I have to go abroad. We are also looking at foreign outbound training program by Army Headquarters. But my submission and request would be the DEFSAT 2024 should give out a roadmap, a vision for the Defense Forces Headquarters IDS as a tri-services setup, wherein in-house academia, lead spatial organization under the supervision of space experts like Dr. Ranjana Kaul should formulate a training program for active military users for understanding the space subjects. The last point I would brought out, sir, I would like to brought in that all this has come just because of one aspect, that is, without a good theory, I cannot create a good story. So with this, I would request the entire participants, whether PSUs, whether academia, whether space experts, senior defense officers, as well as industries and startups, should teach me how to propose a clear picture, how to propose a clear demand by the end user. I am not educated on that. So my education should be upgraded so that as an end user, I can place a clear demand so that the timelines, the wastage ratio, all these can be reduced. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We could think of capsule courses being run on the specialized subjects at our training institutions, and then you, Amandeep, later could teach to the others. We've had, yeah, please.
Thank you, esteemed panel. My name is Pranav Satyanath. I'm from an organization called CSTR. I have 2 questions. First is to Ranjana, ma'am. Ma'am, you correctly said the peaceful uses does not really restrict a lot of the military activities that we...
Clearly, will you? What are you saying? Slower.
Ma'am, my question is that you clearly outlined that what the phrase peaceful purposes means. But as we speak, there are two interpretations of how international law and international space law applies in space for military activities. The first is the McGill Manual, which you were a part of in discussions. And there's the Woomera Manual, which attempts to take international humanitarian law and customary international law. In this regard, how should we as Indians in the space community go forward in interpreting these military uses of outer space in our favor? My second question, as directed by Commodore Agnihotri, I'll be a little more bold. The Air Force today wants to become the Air and Space Force, and their dictum is founded upon the concept of air-space continuum. But using that analogy, we can also say there is a land-air continuum or a land-sea continuum. But given that space is expansive and across all three services, should we change the direction in which we are organizing the formation of Space Force and Space Command? Even though the ball has been the ball has been rolling. Thank you.
So shall I answer? Shall I answer that first?
Yeah, please.
So Pranav, the thing is this, that as I explained to you, the specific attributes of exclusive use of outer space and for peaceful purpose and for space activities for peaceful purpose. In other words, distinguishing between that which is prohibited and that which is permitted as far as military space is concerned. When you talk of the McGill, Millimos, what they have done is, because there is just this one single treaty, which is the Outer Space Treaty. It was set up to govern military space activities and by logic non-military space activities, and by logic that states would govern commercial space activity. So the same terms are used by two different users. One is military and one is civil, looking at it in different perspective. Now for us, peaceful use means civil use. But when the defense will look at it, its meaning changes when the defense is looking at it. What McGill Millimos has done is that it has identified the terms and phrases which are commonly used that derive from the Outer Space Treaty, and they have undertaken a massive global exercise in trying to arrive at a common understanding, meaning internationally a common understanding of those terms and phrases, so that we are not understanding them differently in different countries and differently by different people in the same country. What Woomera is doing is that it is giving you ops details. And one part of it is the application of laws of armed conflict, international humanitarian laws, in context to the three principles of necessity, proximity, and proportionality. So if you're looking to find out how it will be used, then you have to look at a military op, where space was used as a force multiplier. And a very good example is the 1991 Persian Gulf War, because it was an asymmetric warfare, and the full force of the space assets were deployed. And in particular, when you look at the 2003 invasion, you find that there was a blurring of the jus in belli and jus in bello. You couldn't make out what was what, and worst of all was post-bello, the conduct of the United States post-bello, both in Iraq as well as Guantanamo Bay. And ultimately, you would have read the Hamadan versus Donald Rumsfeld, the case, which was decided by the Supreme Court, which said that it was entirely illegal to have set up that military camp. And it still took them years to wind it up. So your laws of armed conflict are very difficult. If you look at Ukraine, for example, where the Russians sort of jammed the Elon Musk satellite, Starlink, and they made a statement in the Conference on Disarmament to say that they see it as a provocation. and that it could be construed as a legitimate target because the Russians exercise sovereign, not sovereign, but quasi sovereign jurisdiction over the satellite. So those sorts of things, those all derive from proportionality.
Okay, we've been issued a whip to close down. But your second question was about why Air Force for the Space Command. You're serious? Okay. Yeah, no. No, we'll come. I mean, just about 2 decades ago, when we planned for, that was the planning then, that you'll have, apart from theater commands, you'll have 3 tri-service commands: cyber, headed by the Navy; space, headed by the Air Force; and special ops, headed by the Army. Okay, we haven't got 3-star commands, but we've got 2-star commands. We've got Air Marshal Khot with us here, and he'll explain.
Thank you, sir. Sir, naturally I'll hand over to you only.
All right, thank you for the question, Pranav, and thank you for the opportunity to clarify some of the confusion that exists in this area, doctrinally. Okay. Air and Space Force, irrespective of whatever names fly around anywhere else, what's important to understand is what determines who operates or who controls a particular medium. Right? You brought out a fundamental doubt about whether there is such a thing as an airspace continuum. Of course it is. You give an example of, maybe can we talk about a land-sea continuum? Of course it is not. For the simple reason that land is a barrier to maritime operations and water is an obstacle for land forces. Each one specializes in his specific domain and medium, right? And therefore the division of responsibility when it comes to the armed forces, each one specializes in a particular special medium. It could be argued, if one talks about, there are different zones when you climb upwards from air to space. Yeah, the characteristics of different zones do vary. Temperature, density, several other things. Weather in a particular portion, no weather somewhere else. Plasma and ionosphere somewhere else. All of these things, yeah, characteristics vary. For example, could you argue then that the surface navy and the undersea domain they constitute 2 separate domains? And it requires a separate force to operate undersea because the characteristics change as you go to lower and lower depths. Just as that is not a sustainable argument, and the masters of the sea remain the navy, and anything to do with water and warfare on the water, or shipping for that, any kind of shipping, remains the naval domain. So similarly, when it comes to 3-dimensional high-speed operations and maneuvers, it falls in the realm of what the Air Force does. Okay. Let me take it further. The mandate of any military space organization is twofold. We talk about services from space, right? Yeah. What are those services from space? These services and products that flow from operations in space enable and enhance operations on the surface. Right. Essentially 3 subdomains we talk about: ISR, PNT, SATCOM. All 3 services and many more, including civilians, are stakeholders in this, and therefore this area of these 3 subdomains is run by the tri-services as a common mandate and is jointly executed by the DSA and the organizations under DSA. Right? There are 2 other subdomains. One is the SSA/SDA, and I'll clarify the difference there also. Okay, which is information gathering about the environment and what's happening there itself, and space operations, conduct of space operations, including maneuvering in space and possibly space countermeasures and counter space operations. Now that is an exact analog of what the Air Force does in the aviation zone where the density is higher. Right? Now this, would you say that it is the Army's responsibility to safeguard the environment, at 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers? It is not. They are specialists of land warfare. So this automatically, by extension, falls into the domain of what the Air Force does. So there are portions which are very, very tri-services, executed jointly, and there are portions which have a greater linkage functionally with what the Air Force does.
Thank you. AVM Khot for that very detailed explanation. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this panel. I would take this opportunity to thank all my panelists, also SATCOM India, for running this 3-day conference. Do we have a concluding session?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So, thank you very much.
I'd request the esteemed chair and the panelists to please kindly stay behind, kindly remain seated on the stage. We're going through the closing session. I request you all. Please stay back on the stage. So I quickly invite on stage Mr. Pawan Kapoor, Board Member SIA-INDIA, to kindly give his closing remarks.
Save time.
So my closing would be, I'm also saving time for John Padu. So my closing is basically, I've been told that I've been given 60 minutes, so I'll reduce that also. It's been a tiring date for today, but it's been a delightful 3 days of conference expo, where it started with our CDS, and he had explained what are the requirements and what are the challenges. So we'll follow that to the hilt. And SIA, I must say, we have got a huge responsibility of accumulating the data where wealth of knowledge has been gained by interaction between the generals, admirals, air marshals, and other officers, academia, industry, investors. And today itself, the doctrine also has been discussed, which is an important part of the domain. And we are going to collectively, our team, going to pick this, and we'll be returning back to you with what we have learned from you and what more is required from us, so that we collaborate together and make this space industry a total success. One area which comes to this, that whatever we do, we have to secure ourselves. Secondly, we have to be careful in interoperability. That is where, when we go with the international collaborations, which is must, that area would have to be very keenly sorted out. And I really thank my colleagues, General Pannu, Mr. Anil Prakash, Dr. Rao, Rajiv, and all other members of SI, including Govind, Rajan, Ravi, that with all our joint efforts, we have been able to make it a success. And now what we are looking, I think so, that we have been, but we have to now do a lot of homework to make it, what I would say, much more matured discussions for InSpace, which we'll be doing in June. And we'll be coming back with the invite to all of you. We have fixed the dates, the venue would be fixed, and we'll be sending the invitation. And General Pannu, I would request, you must come here for 2 minutes and express gratitude to the entire audience, which was so cooperative with us.
1 minute would be. Gratitude to the diehards who are here, and the panel sitting here is the one which is going to lead us through writing the first chapter of a report, because we have taken a decision to raise the space agency. They say you take a decision and then make it right, and they are the ones who are going to make it right for us. And let me also promise, if the SIA agrees, we shall have this panel and this subject, the first subject, for the next event. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Please hold on. I now take the pleasure of requesting AVM Sanjay Bhatnagar, Director St. Joe's, to please join us on stage and kindly give his closing remarks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, grateful for all those present here, diehards, like General Panu said. First of all, my compliments. First DevSat was the one which brought out the importance of space. This one underscored the significance of the space, and also the great interaction opportunity it provided to all the stakeholders was phenomenal. My compliments. Fabulous forum was provided, and in terms of collaboration, in terms of domain knowledge that gained here, what was gained here was really praiseworthy. I think the ball was set rolling by the motivation lecture from the CDS, the governor of Uttarakhand, and former DefSec. That really got the ball rolling, and really thankful for the speakers and who contributed, especially the each and every chairperson. The kind of knowledge that he brought, professional knowledge that he brought on the forum was phenomenal. So also was each and every panelist. The contribution of each one of them is highly, highly praiseworthy. I must thank especially the ISRO, the BEL, the DLRL, and a whole lot of other people who represented from the industry, as also the media, and also the also the professionals that came from the armed forces as well. Highly thankful for each and every participant and from the audience who took an active part in each and every discussion, sir. My compliments to SIA-INDIA, President Dr. Rao, Mr. DG, Mr. Anil. Thank you, General Panu, for such a nice contribution. And from St. Joe's side, our recommendation would be to continue with the partnership and take this forward in the years to come. Thank you very much. All the best. Thanks.
Thank you all once again on behalf of DefSat Conference and Expo and SIA India. We take the opportunity of thanking you all and wishing you a lovely evening ahead. Thank you, and see you at the next edition of DefSat.
Thank you, and well job done. Well job done, must say. Thank you so much, sir. Honored, sir.